Let me share my screen. So yes, my name is Tuana, and I'm actually calling in from Amsterdam, and it is not sunny. It is very cold and rainy. And today I'm going to be talking about, let me start my slides. I'm going to be talking about building ourselves private search systems with retrieval augmentation. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how we do that with Haystack. And a bit about myself. I already said that I'm calling in from Amsterdam, but I'm one of the developer advocates at deepset, and I fully focus on our open source LLM framework, which is called Haystack. And here's all of my social media information if you do want to look at those. But let me start by quickly mentioning what even retrieval augmentation is, and then I'll take it from there. Could someone tell me, by the way, when I share it like this, do you also see extra video, or is it just my slides? I think hopefully it's just my slides.
At the moment, we just see your slides.
Okay, great. That's how it should be. All right, so let me start talking about what retrieval augmentation is. I'm sure a lot of you already know, but I have started to really enjoy opening up my presentations with a very simple example that at least starts to depict what the retrieval augmentation achieves for us. And hopefully this resonates with you as well. So I have an example here, and I want to start talking about how we can make use of large language models in an effective way. But first, my example is a way that doesn't necessarily work. So this is a screenshot from an interface I'm pretty sure a lot of you are aware of. And I've simply asked the question, what is a prompt builder in Haystack? And I got a response from ChatGPT, and it's very actually clear. It says that according to my knowledge from January 2022, but at the end of the day, there is no answer. There is no accurate answer, and it's basically telling us, I actually don't know. The reason for that is that ChatGPT at this point in time doesn't have the right context. It doesn't have the right information about prompt builders. And a bit of a sneak peek, prompt builders are quite new to Haystack. I'm going to talk about it later, but Haystack, as a framework, it's going through a major upgrade. And Haystack is becoming Haystack 2.0. We just released Haystack 2.0 beta this past Monday. And prompt builders, no documentation existed on prompt builders until this Monday when it became public. But we do have the documentation now, and this is a screenshot from it. If you go to Haystack documentation and scroll to 2.0, you'll get this page. And if I change my prompt just a bit, and I say, instead of what is prompt builders in Haystack, and if I say, answer the question giving the following documentation, and I've cheated here, and I've simply just copy-pasted what you just saw. I've copy-pasted that whole documentation page. And at the very end of this, it got cut off, but I said, answer the question given the following documentation. And then after the documentation that was copy-pasted, I said, question, colon, what are prompt builders in Haystack? And then I got a pretty good response. And this is basically the essence of retrieval augmentation. Retrieval augmentation, I know that I think it was, someone referred to it as a bit of a hack, and I agree. It's a really neat hack to get large language models to be able to complete a task with the relevant context at hand. So why do we do this? Because large language models just don't simply know the answer to everything. They don't know your entire world, but they are really good at following instructions. At least some of them are quite impressive at following instructions. So the idea is that we can help them complete their task by giving them relevant context plus an instruction or a prompt. And from our experience at deepset and the way we see people using Haystack, what's becoming really clear is that most production use cases are quite unique and end up requiring customizations. And another part that I want to talk about, especially in terms of customizations, is what retrieval augmentation is not necessarily just question answering. I know we talk about retrieval augmentation in the context of question answering a lot, but actually the instruction we give or the prompt we give a large language model defines what the application even is. And one of those applications could be question answering. This is the first example I have here, but simply by customizing our instruction or our prompt, you can also end up in applications that do summarization or question generation. I think a couple of weeks ago, I built a demo application that was, it just generated poems based off of documentation. But that's the number one most obvious thing we can customize. And then the other thing you can customize, and here you already start to get exposed to a bit of what Haystack does. At the bottom here, you see some orange boxes, and you can see some things in curly brackets. It can be context, text, question, document, etc. And in Haystack, this actually means that we're expecting these to be filled in at query time. What else can be customized is, where does this even come from? And a lot of the time we see people, the most classic thing to do is maybe to connect our RAG application or our RAG pipeline to a database such as Weaviate or Pinecone or Quadrant or Elastic, etc. But at other times, we simply need to connect to a specific API, or we want to do something with our Slack messages, or we want to do something with Discord and GitHub, and the list can go on and on and on. Basically, depending on what you want to build and what you want to build for, there are lots of requirements, lots of use cases, and quite a lot of customization that goes into place. So a bit about Haystack. If you go to this QR code, it should take you to the Haystack GitHub page. Haystack is a fully open source framework, all built in Python. And the aim of Haystack is to allow for you to build custom LLM applications. It provides tools that developers can use to build these custom applications. And the main idea with Haystack, the building blocks of Haystack, are what we call pipelines and components. And I'm just briefly going to mention especially why we're going to Haystack 2.0 now and why we've released beta. Haystack was always built on the idea of components and pipelines. But what we want to do with Haystack 2.0 is make those pipelines a lot more flexible. And one example I can give of how they are getting more flexible is that now pipelines can branch out, come back together, loop back. They are proper directed graphs now. And I want to give you some examples of pipelines, and hopefully you can start to see how Haystack can help you customize these pipelines depending on what you want to build. So here we happen to have a pipeline which is made up of these 5 components. Maybe we can even say 6 components. And what it's doing is getting some content from a URL. It's converting that content into a type of document. Is splitting that document up. It's then embedding those documents, creating embedding representations, and then it's writing that document to a database. Now, at every step here, we have the option to switch out these components for something else, depending on what we want to do. We also have the option of switching out the embedding model. For example, we can use an embedding model that is open source from Hugging Face, or we can use OpenAI or Cohere embedding models. And again, we can switch out what document store we use or what database we use. Another type of pipeline, and this is the more interesting pipeline, and I'm mostly going to focus on these types of pipeline in my presentation, classic RAG pipelines or retrieval augmented pipelines. And here we have a pipeline where, given the user's query, a retriever component is retrieving the most relevant documents from any given database. And then we start building a prompt, and we'll see how we build a prompt in a bit. And then we have a generative component or a generator generate us an answer. But one thing that's common with both of these pipelines, whether it's generating answers or writing documents to a specific database, is that data is flowing from one component to the other until it reaches the end, until something is resolved. But often what we see is Haystack, we don't necessarily know exactly what components you might need for your application. So as a framework, there are no assumptions as what a developer or an engineering team might need. And we often see that people start mixing and matching their own components depending on what they want to build. And often the common thing that they have, especially with nowadays with RAG pipelines becoming a lot more popular and a lot more useful for people, the final components that we see people using tend to be generator components. And how do we do that? Well, we build custom components, and in my talk today, I'm actually going to show you a custom component that I built yesterday. It works. I don't know if I'll run it live, but it does work. And you'll get resources for the collab that I've prepared, so you can run that yourself as well. But Haystack provides a very simple interface for the creation of custom components. And that's simply by you have to import component and you simply decorate a class as component. Here I've created a component called my custom component, and this does nothing. It does nothing. It just needs to have a run function. The run function has an input. And the other thing is that inputs and outputs are typed, and for the pipeline to know what kind of output it should expect from this component, we have to also put a decorator of output types to the run function. And this is basically telling us here, I hope you can see my mouse, but this is telling us here that this component in the pipeline, when I have it in the pipeline, I should expect an output called documents, and it should return a list of document type. And here, this one is basically doing nothing, but it's still a very valid component to have. So an example of a custom component was an application that we built with our community, actually, on Discord. And the idea was that we wanted to build an application where I could simply give a number, and that number would define the last X amount of Hacker News posts I wanted to look at. And I would fetch those Hacker News posts, and the RAG application that I built, the idea was I wanted summaries of the last 2, 3, 5 Hacker News posts. So how did we do that? We created first our custom prompt template. This will be used by that prompt builder that initially ChatGPT did not know about. And the prompt template simply said that you'll be provided a few of the latest Hacker News articles, followed by their URLs. And here, what I've basically done is, in this for loop, I've said that the prompt builder should expect an input called articles, and then I've simply looped through those articles. Each of those articles have some content. They also have some meta information, like their URL, which is great because then potentially I can also say something like, provide a brief summary, but followed by their URLs, meaning that I can sort of have a referenced RAG application simply by customizing my prompt. And then the way I can build the RAG application itself is by using my Hacker News fetcher, which is my own custom component, and then connecting that Hacker News fetcher, the articles I get from it, to the prompt builder, so that every article is now appearing in the prompt that I send to an LLM. Next up, this is the main custom component I want to show you today, was the idea to build a private Notion search application. So for this, I actually created myself a private Notion organization, and I copy-paste, I just have one page in there. I copy-pasted over the Hacker News article I wrote about that Hacker News, the custom component I built. And I then went ahead and built a custom Notion component. The idea was that I would fetch my pages that I enable from Notion, I split them up, and then I store them in a simple document store, but I store them by creating embeddings of those documents. And for that, I decided to use a open source sentence transformers model off of Hugging Face. And once I have that, the idea was to then have a question answering application where I would use, again, a Hugging Face, a sentence transformers model, an open source embedding model, to retrieve the most relevant documents from my database. And then I would use a Cohere model to generate an answer. So I actually want to leave this and I want to show you exactly how I've done that. And hopefully you can see this screen. I'm going to assume you can see the screen.
Yep.
All right. So the way I did that, this is going to be a bit of Notion information for you, but with Notion, you can create integrations for your organizations. And I went ahead and created one called Notion Extractor. The reason for that is I actually even misnamed it. My custom component is called Notion Exporter. And then I gave this Notion Extractor component integration access to this page that you're seeing here. That gives me an API key. And then you have access to this Colab notebook. What I did was I created a Notion exporter. This is a very simplified Notion exporter. It's just a class with a component decorator and then the same component outputs decorator for the run function. And this simply expects page IDs, and you can get those page IDs from your URL, the end of your URL for each Notion page. And then it returns a list of documents. This is a very, very simplified version of this custom component, simply to make it easier to run in Colab. But the good news is we've actually packaged this Notion exporter and made it available to the Haystack community. And then I have gone ahead and created what I'm calling an indexing pipeline. And basically all you have to know here is by the time I have connected all of my Haystack components to each other, I'm able to run the indexing pipeline and provide it my page ID. And that's chunks it, embeds it, and puts it into my in-memory document store. I'm not going to run these live because I'm too nervous running things live, but you can see the outputs. And then next up, I started to customize my RAG pipeline. And for this, I just wanted a question answering one. So I created a prompt that simply says, answer the query based on the content in the documents. And you can see what in the documents I'm even accessing. So here I'm looping through something called documents. And for each of them, I'm accessing simply the content so that I'm not accessing any sort of metadata or anything like that. And I'm building exactly that RAG pipeline I showed you just now. I'm using sentence transform as text embedder. And then I'm using a Cohere generator. This uses the command model by default. And then I got my RAG pipeline, and I can ask it the query, what are the steps for creating a custom component? And this is exactly what I talked about in that article that I copy-pasted over to my Notion org. And I got a pretty good answer. It says, to create a custom component in Haystack 2.0, you need to first add the component decorator, and then I need to implement run function with the decorator component output types, and so on and so on. You have access, hopefully, to this. If not, I'll make sure that I enable the access to this notebook. And it all should be runnable. The only thing you have to do to use it with your own Notion org is to follow the instructions to create first your Notion integration, then get your Notion API token for that integration. And unfortunately, Notion has a really crazy way of extracting page IDs. It's not just a number, but I've included instructions for you to do that as well. And with that, I want to end up by saying everything I've been showing you today in all of the code snippets have been code from Haystack 2.0 beta. As I said, Haystack is going through a major upgrade. It is a breaking change, but it's making component building, customization, and pipelines a lot more flexible. And because we've released beta, we've decided to introduce people to the new features of beta by hosting our own Advent. It's called Advent of Haystack. Every couple of days, we put up a new challenge that introduces you to a new design of Haystack 2.0. So if you like, you can also do that and give us feedback, because we're always open to feedback. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. And here are all of the other resources that might be useful. And I will end it there.
Fantastic. It does look like you have a few questions in the Q&A widget, if you want to pop over there and tackle those.
Stop sharing, and then I can. Okay, so first thing I can see is that what are the useful Python library scripts we can use for building chatbots and to get meaningful responses and questions for the questions asked. Thanks. There are quite a bunch, actually. So I can already start pinpointing some useful Haystack components that might work for you. But there are two things. So a lot of model providers now are talking about chat models, and this is mostly about the format in which you send a query to a model rather than the chat experience itself. So in a lot of cases, to build a chat application, you're actually going to want to think about what kind of memory you have. And for that, you can make use of the chat agents. For example, this is in Haystack 1.22, I think. So it's not in 2.0 yet, but it's definitely usable, where you have a few options of what kind of memory you want to provide. So that can be anything from a interaction with a LLM where the prompt keeps expanding and the whole history is in the prompt, but that's not very beneficial in most cases because you're just going to run out of space. Or you can start implementing your own memory. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. How does Haystack handle the deployment of models from Hugging Face or other providers into NLP pipelines? So you have quite a few options. There are many more options now with Haystack 1.x, and we're slowly adding them to 2.0 as well. All of the classic providers are available. Anything like Hugging Face TGI, OpenAI, Cohere, and actually SageMaker and Azure as well. So in a lot of cases, people don't want to necessarily go through the burden of deploying their own models. So SageMaker, Azure, these are great options to have, or OpenAI if you want to. Or you can simply run a model locally. For beginners, what are the best resources to start learning? Potentially, yes. If you go to the Haystack website, I'm going to send it over. There is a tutorials page, and actually we've just today separated it so that all of the tutorials for the 1.x release, which is still the stable release, is in one place. But if you want to start exploring 2.0, you can just click a button and you'll be off to the 2.0 tutorials as well. I'll send that in the link. Oh, good question. I think there is for 1.x, but don't quote me on that. I'm just seeing, is there an integration of Haystack with Olama? I think there is for 1.x, and if not, I've definitely seen messages on Slack, so it was something that someone is working on, but don't quote me on it. Is the extra information? Yes, definitely. So this was even the first question. Is the extra information embedded the same way as the training set? One thing about pipelines, this is important. Once I have a pipeline, we call it indexing pipeline. An indexing pipeline is generally the pipeline that helps you write data and embeddings to a document store. Once I have that, any new information I have, I can just run through the same pipeline, and you know that the same model is being used, the same splitter is being used. It's just uniform across the board. And it's great because if you run the same data, it can detect duplicates and not go through the same process over again. But that's an option that you can enable or disable. In one sentence, what can a person trying to get their work done suddenly be able to do what they weren't able to do before? I think this is a very philosophical question. How does Haystack assist in fine-tuning a pre-trained language model? Haystack 1.x has fine-tuning capability for extractive QA models, but fine-tuning is not currently something we're focusing on. But we are integrating with other services that help you fine-tune LLMs and use it off of them.